The Zim dollar continues to depreciate at such a staggering rate. Many store owners now trade in foreign currency. 80% of the population is unemployed, and even with a job, life is tough in Zimbabwe.
Welcome back. Zimbabwe stayed in the headlines for much of this year, with disputed elections, economic freefall, political violence, and then a cholera epidemic. CNN is banned from entering the country, but our Nkapile Mabuse crossed into Zimbabwe twice at great personal risk. She described for us what she saw there.
Daily life in Zimbabwe is a huge struggle. Everywhere you go in the capital, Harare, there are queues for everything, not only money, but there are queues for food, there are queues for petrol. It really, really is tragic. And also, I mean, now there's a huge outbreak of cholera.
Raw sewage from burst pipes spews like a fountain, contaminating everything in its path, including wells and streams where many Zimbabweans are now getting water. Robert Mugabe's government says it does not have enough chemicals to clean water. It has simply stopped providing it in some areas. 29-year-old Joy Kabade died of cholera last month. His family says cholera took his life in a matter of hours. Despite this, many here, including the Kabade family, continue to use wells and other risky ways of getting water because they simply have no choice. Doctors worry about this woman from Mashwinga in Zimbabwe. 8 months pregnant, she may be too weak to give birth to a healthy baby.
And of course, they can't really get much help from the hospitals because most of the main hospitals in Zimbabwe have shut. They don't have the resources, they don't have the personnel. Scores of Zimbabwean nurses and doctors have fled the country because it is just too difficult to live in that country.
CNN is banned from reporting inside Zimbabwe, but we managed to sneak into 2 of the country's largest hospitals to witness the conditions for ourselves. Inside, patients wait for hours to get help because doctors and nurses have left the country's collapsing public health care system in droves. We are told there's only 1 doctor available at a time to admit the sick, and an 8-hour gap every day where there is no doctor at all in the emergency ward. In the 15 minutes that we were in this ward, the disease claimed yet another victim.
At the moment, what's happening is 8 organizations are equipping clinics to try and treat the outbreak of cholera. You know, one Zimbabwean put it simply to me. He said, if you are sick, if you get sick in Zimbabwe and you don't have money, you die. Since CNN and other news agencies are not allowed to report in Zimbabwe, if the authorities would have spotted me, I would have been arrested. How long I would stay in prison is anyone's guess, really. I mean, in Zimbabwe, the police and the system there can do whatever they please with a human being.
They push shoppers' trolleys for tips in the day, and at night entertain destitute Zimbabweans just like them who have come to South Africa to seek a better life. Their short comic skits make fun of the daily hardships in their battered country.
No job. No job.
The children act out how unemployment, food shortages and a collapsed economy have forced many to jump borders, often with the help of corrupt officials.
Okay.
At age 15 and 14, brothers Tafuma and Matthias Malunga traveled to South Africa on their own in late October and are living in an open field with close to 1,000 other Zimbabwean refugees. They are not the youngest members of this destitute community.
You know, I saw many heartbreaking things in Zimbabwe, spoke to people who were truly, truly suffering. But one image that will stick in my mind is when I was leaving Zimbabwe, I gave a waiter $20 as a tip. And this man just started crying. And he said to me that, you know, he had been trying to save money for months to get a passport so he can leave the country. We have to keep telling the Zimbabwe story. I mean, the fact that Robert Mugabe does not want international news agencies in there is because he's trying to hide from the world what is really unfolding in that country. It is a huge humanitarian crisis that we need as journalists. It's our responsibility, especially on this continent, to keep telling the world exactly what is happening in Zimbabwe so that something can be done for the people of that country.
Kenya falls apart, then comes back together again. Coming up on Inside Africa, Zane Verjee and David Mackenzie have both sides of the story.
Making business news in Africa. London-based mining company Anglo American delayed expansion for its platinum procurement operation in South Africa. The company says it has not assessed the effect the delay will have on jobs. Meanwhile, Pretoria-based Kumba Iron Ore Limited, controlled by Anglo, plans to cut fourth quarter output and slash 2009 capital expenditures by a fifth. And Nigeria's National Petroleum Corporation is reportedly close to entering a joint venture with the African Petroleum PLC to construct an oil refinery in Lagos. It's expected to get underway next year, and it would help ease Nigeria's long-standing problem of getting its oil to distributors nationwide.
You're watching Inside Africa. Welcome back. Like Zimbabwe, Kenya was traumatized by disputed elections and a rash of political violence this year. Thousands were displaced and about 1,000 were killed. CNN's Zane Verjee grew up in Kenya and she covered the story for us. I asked her what it was like watching your country, which was once a beacon of stability, descend into chaos.
It was probably one of the most difficult and dangerous stories I've ever covered, Aisha, simply because of the kind of story it was.
We're now landing in Timbarua. As we've come here, we've seen areas that are completely devastated, homes burned down.
The ethnic tensions, the ethnic bloodshed in a country really pushed toward the brink of collapse was the greatest fear. And on the other hand, it's home. My parents live there. I've been born and brought up there. It was difficult to see a country that most people know for safaris and amazing wild game and beautiful beaches of Mombasa and Lamu, suddenly places that became synonymous with danger and threats and bloodshed.
Or how did you go about trying to really get across the complexities of what was really taking place?
Just to explain to people that there are more than 40 different tribes in Kenya, and most of the time the tribes have gotten along pretty well. Understanding the colonial history and what happened to make a situation this difficult, where the fault lines could really be fueled by politicians that were looking for a fight. Because at the end of the day, the people don't necessarily have, on a fundamental level, every single tribe a fight with each other. Some of them do have legitimate differences, but it's always been relatively contained. But this was a fight for power between politicians of different tribes, and they really fueled, in large part, a situation that almost got out of control. So they burned our house yesterday, and she's just been sitting here since.
One situation which clearly was spiraling out of control, and you found yourself in the midst of it, was when security officials were approaching and you got hit by a tear gas canister, and then you became the story, Zane.
Yeah, that was a really strange place to be. That was another layer on top of just sort of the obvious chaos and personal shock that I was going through.
Are you okay?
Yeah, it's okay, I'm standing. I really, though, Aisha, just looking around at that moment, it just became really aware that while that had happened, the biggest story was what was happening around me. And that was, I remember this old woman selling tomatoes being just beaten up by the paramilitary forces and, you know, and being targeted, the country going up in flames, villages and towns that I had known just utterly destroyed.
Did the story make you question the whole notion of objectivity?
I think more than objectivity, I would say that I could give perspective. I could draw on my experiences as a Kenyan, on my experiences of the different tribes and how they've lived amongst each other. It was a really important factor to explaining this situation and to also explaining the psyche of the Kenyan people, which, as you know, when we cover stories, it's not what we just see on TV isn't what the entire country thinks and what's happening in the entire country.
It was an American election watched closely right around the world, perhaps nowhere more so than in Kenya. That's straight ahead. Stay with us.